remember being sleeping on a mountainside for like week 3 now in the rain without a tent or sleeping bag, carrying all the books I should have read in my college program that I flunked out of. That was my pillow. And I'm getting stung by these horrible centipedes and chewed on by mosquitoes.
So cool. All right. So tell me what you do, what you're doing now.
Okay. Uh, right now, my work is teaching at the university at MIU.
What was the moment in your life where you got taken by the whole body of depth psychology?
So it was 2008. I was attracted to it originally through myth, and my attraction to mythology came through my appreciation of poetry early on. And I saw these great poets or whatever, or reading these beautiful poems, and all of a sudden a mythological illusion would be dropped into the poem, and it would just open up the whole poem. And by bringing in that kind of depth of story and image and antiquity and all that. Okay, so then when I was a little over 40, I decided that was going to go back to school and study mythology to become a better poet, basically, was part of the reason. And then, so I got to Pacifica Graduate Institute, which is really, um, one of the few schools that provides that the real thing. So I went in to study mythology, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, so we're going to also have this sort of emphasis on depth psychology, this sort of kind of thing. And I was like, that kind of put up red flags for me because I was always into the experience, not into the not into I always thought psychology was simply analyzing. It didn't sound attractive to me. Um, and and then and then the first quarter, just about a month or two into it, I was off to the races. I wanted more depth psychological content than I did mythological even. So for a while there, it was so exciting because it's such a helpful field to deal with things that come at us in life. I find it to be extremely valuable and healing on the level of on many levels. And if I may go on this for a second, because I think this is valuable, one of the main things that depth psychology does, for me at least, is that it provides freedom and even a light in times of suffering. I am being deepened while I am in this state of suffering. Now, that's dangerous because, oh, well, let's get deep and let's go find new ways to suffer. It's not like that. The depth psychology work, see, I know that this is soulful when I go down and that I need to be there for a time. Yes, sure, I want to get out and get back into the light and the joy. But while it's on, I know, well, at least I'm being deepened. At least I so believe that I'm accruing wisdom, um, and foundation, not to mention things like empathy and compassion, which come with, say, for example, depression. No one wants to be depressed. It doesn't feel good, but it certainly deepens. I remember being sleeping on a mountainside for like week 3 now in the rain without a tent or sleeping bag, carrying all the books I should have read in my college program that I flunked out of, all the books I should have read. That was my pillow. And I'm getting stung by these horrible centipedes and chewed on by mosquitoes. It wasn't your ideal palm tree kind of thing.
Then getting into depth psychology, mythology, um, the classically the unconscious, the dreams. Uh, these are all these all have a certain feel to it.
the depth psychological unconscious, whether you come at it from Freud or Jung or whomever, that you know that the unconscious is we're not conscious of it. The ego is not conscious of it. That's the you know one way to approach what the unconscious is. So hence unknown. And then in my business in poetry, um, at least, is mystery. We have an appetite for the mystery. My goodness, in our stories, in our movies, and wherever it is, there's a tremendous beauty to it. How everyone loves the mystery. And so yeah, the unknown and its correlation to the unconscious or to the, and then when we have in mythology, the metaphor for the unconscious being the underworld and death. It gives us a deeper perspective that's less horrible as hell and death. It brings it from the level of certainty to acknowledging that I don't know, where things just sort of interpenetrate and, or rather, a better word, interpermeate. This beauty of knowing one doesn't know. And what a wonderful foundation to begin with in so many explorations into life. There's something about not owning it, not owning it with certainty, that seeds a space for it to be what it is. And there's always new discoveries to know, like in a relationship, of whatever the object of perception is.
I'm very curious on how you would answer how this body of material, everything you just described, how that actually can be and is integrated into practical day-to-day being human.
Well, first of all, the practicality of the mythology is that it gives images embedded in story, provides imagery and story, which speak towards patterns in practical life through metaphor. So that's what I find is really valuable about the mythology, is that sure, we can come at it in conventional psychological terms, which would be more abstract. Early to bed, early to rise will make you happy, wealthy, and wise. And so there's no image anywhere in there. It's simply a formula of intellect and rational fact, which is very important. Half the game. I'm into it. But with mythology, now we get images, characters, a story, a setting, an environment. So all of these different things get to go in and enforce in me why it is important to go to bed early. But that's really important, because once content that's abstract becomes metaphorical, it has to have images to become symbolic, and a symbol and metaphor need image, need relationship to provide, again, that connotative associative place where it's interpermeating as opposed to delineated classifications of information or whatever. So for me, I'll like again with the myth of Icarus, for me that's a great go-to when I'm reading content about what happens when you get all narcissistic, and then the narcissist myth too for that. So now I have something more experiential. It's in a story and it has images and it has a place, a setting, a scene. I've been there in my imagination. I've experienced it, the imagery and the wind blowing through the trees and the colors and everything are actually tangible material content, although highly subtle, existing within the realm of my imagination, which is the place where we have to go if we're going to be able to open up or step through that doorway that's made available as an option through a symbol or a metaphor. So that's the value. That's the practical value of the mythology, that it gives it gives the story to the principle.
Yes, it's well and good to have the the data. Go to bed early, wake up early. That's going to help with success. And then with a story, a myth, with those images, that lesson is expounded on and experienced in a broader and deeper way.
Perfect. Exactly.
Read a book once years ago, and it was talking about Navy pilots, but they didn't have the emotional experience of it. They did have the emotional experience of landing on the boat, and then what came after that, which was a hot shower, a warm meal, and a bed. And the newbies would be coming in and they would be getting very loud signals from the control tower that they were too low. And oftentimes they would still crash into the boat because they hadn't had the emotional experience of crashing into the boat. So they knew it intellectually, but they didn't experience it. And so without the experience, it just wasn't quite enough.
I think that people fail to recognize that the rational intellectual side, if one appears to be, leaning too far in that direction, we often don't recognize that there's tremendous emotion layered in or stitched into that already.
I wonder now, Craig, if the pursuit of depth psychology and the unconscious isn't to come back with intellectual knowledge, but is a felt uh, experience of something that is fundamentally our own opposites.
Exactly. Going into the unconscious, first of all, is right on you, because you're talking about going in and retrieving and bringing back the lesson or the intellectual knowledge. And then you're saying, nope, you're going in for the felt experience and to recognize it, as my opposite, or at least for what it is. It took me so long to get to that point in my work with depth psychology, because it was always that hero's journey kind of thing where I'm going to go in, I'm going to extract the gold, and I'm going to bring it back to the light of day. Like with my dream work, we are the ones that visit the unconscious consciously. We bring the consciousness into the darkness of the unknown, of the unconscious, and all that kind of thing. But then, there's the danger of transcribing what we experience in our encounter with the unconscious, of transcribing that into our ordinary daylight upper world language, concepts, ideas, desires, all that kind of thing, so that we've taken it out of its environment, and we're trying to translate it into ours. When you talk about the feel and the experience, then you don't steal it from its medium, from its environment, and translate it into what our ego language or whatever. You let it be what it is. The message is the experience. What essence can I bring back? Now, yes, that's the first level in. Go in there, get some good lessons, or go in there and whatever, and it'll help your waking life and all that. And I think it does. But then the next level, I think, is, like you say, the interaction, the just simply being in the environment, simply looking at it, like with dream work, just looking at the dream, tracking the dream into the unconscious. Now you're in its home. Stop forcing it to come over to your house. We are the guests. The ego is the guest in the realm of the unconscious, so to speak.
In regards to going into our own unconscious, what are the risks you're taking on going into your own unconscious? And the follow-up question is, what are the risks you take by not going into your unconscious?
First, I thought that going into the unconscious was lightweight stuff. Okay, whatever. I'm going to write down my dreams and do some active imagination, for example. Whatever. I'm just had a dream, writing it down. Now I'm talking to a figure, and imagining, just imagining that has these responses. So I write them down, all that kind of thing. Um, though I say that facetiously because yes, exactly, you imagined it, and that's its validity right there. There's a lot less to imagination than people imagine, and that's saying a lot more about it. You just do it, and its validity is that it is, and that it's on. And such an important thing because like when we go to the unconscious, then now we are working in the imagination with the images and the figures and the content. We're no longer processing it in the rational. We're processing it in the imaginal, in the language of the psyche. There's a reason that the word imagination, the root of it is imagination. This is where it goes down. And it goes in. It's not just down, it's also in. This is still matter. It's just we're just getting really subtle. We're getting really, really, really deep in the subtlety. It's highly, highly, highly immaterial, yet still material, but so barely approaching it as a real place. Like you say, the dangers of going into the unconscious. Okay, I'm with the thread still, but I just wanted to do a little lap because I saw a bunny and I'm a dog and I had to chase it and come back. Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be careful going into that space because the more one goes into it, one can go in too far into the unconscious. Going in too far, then you start getting into. There's a degree. Again, it's by degree. There's a certain degree of going in that's, I think, very healing.
What I heard you say is one of the dangers, and maybe that's all of them, but one of the dangers is, in a word, you can be disassociated from conscious day-to-day reality.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. A dissociation fantasy world.
You naturally went to the positive, which is healing. So if I flip that one around, then the risk of not going into the unconscious is to not then heal something.
I think so. Mm-hmm.
So, okay, cool. So the disassociation part is really clear. I think we all know that as children because we had to grow through that. It's like our parents beating us if we're just in, spacing out in imagination and we have a job to do or homework to do or, get with a program kind of a thing. To adjust towards conventional life.
I wanna say before I respond to that also going into the unconscious isn't just um, dream work. It's also fantasy. It's also daydream. It's also art. It's also when I read a poem and I inhabit the imagination. There are many different ways in. Psychedelics is another one that's on the table. So that's the elephant in
Mm-hmm.
the room. So we'll keep it in whatever room that's in. But
So
but
it's a fascinating,
yeah, it
fascinating
is.
topic,
And
especially especially within this subject matter, because I think psychedelics, not everybody's associating the unconscious and Jungian psychology or psychology with psychedelics.
yeah, exactly. I mean, they are the same place. They are in terms of depth psychology, they are the same place as the unconscious, or liaisons to the unconscious, and the dangers of not. So there's the depth psychological tenet that the wound flags the entry to the soul, and it's not easy because wounds hurt, and some wounds are you got to go in there and do. I mean, getting into it is healing. Some wounds are best left alone, though. I think. It's not an all or nothing thing. Again, here's the exception. Some stuff you can sweep under the rug, and it's okay. Let's look at the hard stuff. Um, Often find that it's not as hard as our fear made it appear to be. Once we get our feet wet, going into the wound. To get towards the soul because it's a symptom that's coming at us that finally comes to us and says, hey, there's something behind here. Actually, what's behind it, is a complex. and it's generally exhibited as a wound, as a neurosis. If we'll leave the metaphor a little bit and now just come to the just abstract language, that it's a neurosis. I got this problem. I got this eye twitch or whatever, um, and you know, well, guess what? That's the unconscious reaching out hand saying, all right, here it is. It's your call. This is the gateway. If you want to look into it. And then how to get into that, how to get into that. I mean, that gets complicated, whether it's like a focus of eyes in your dreams, for example. And you keep dreaming, and every dream you have, all of a sudden there's an eye or something. It's like, what's this about? It doesn't necessarily have to be twitching. Um, or it could be a horse that keeps getting hooked up to a carriage. Hitching again and again, because it's been shown that this will happen, like puns and rhymes and that sort of thing will occur when it's attending to the same whatever the content is under the on the table at the time, or that we're focusing on.
All right. So if I hear you right, the we go in to the unconscious to heal uh, the unconscious. The symptoms are the way in. Where did the wound come from in the first place?
But I have to approach it mythologically, and I'm just thinking about, well, this is the emergence from the underworld mythologically. Our underworld is unconscious or underwater too. Whether it's a wave coming up out of the water, whether it's, just so happens that, if you're into the evolutionary theory, that, yeah, well, the fishes walked up out of the water on their new limbs, and now we got people. Yeah, so, that's interesting that, and life coming out of water. So important, and water's association with life, very much so, whether it's the feminine principle and whatever goes on and on and on. So, so I'm thinking about the underworld myths, like with Hermes, Mercurius, as the guide of souls, um, coming up out of the underworld to the light of day.
I'll share my idea and you tell me if this is a good way to think about it. So the ego emerges out of the self. And that's what's conscious, right? You've got the unconscious and you've got the conscious, and those are, broadly speaking, the two hemispheres of the one sphere, which is the self. So self is split into conscious and unconscious, and then within the conscious there's ego. So the whole self, by definition, is half conscious and half unconscious, or at least maybe it's 95% unconscious and 5% unconscious. And the conscious part is, in fact, not whole. And therefore, to engage the unconscious, which is at least half of us, is healing in the sense that it's bringing about wholeness, or at least truth.
Yeah, well, no, I think that you say wholeness right away, I think is great, because the root of the word heal is Old English hal, which means whole. And so, the relationship between healthy and wholeness is right there. Wholeness being, attentiveness to the totality. Instincts, which then move forward into archetypes. This is all in the unconscious now. Instinct into archetype, into anima, animus, into shadow. We're still in the unconscious, into ego. And now the ego has a sort of straddles conscious and unconscious, although we give it, like you were saying, that struggle of how much conscious, how much unconscious. 95.5. I don't know. I know I don't know. And then from ego into persona. So a good way for me to begin is I'll just put ego on the conscious side. So there's the line right there. Between shadow and ego is your line between the conscious and the unconscious. So instincts to archetypes to anima, animus to shadow. There's unconscious. And then we cross over into ego. And then from ego, go further into persona, how the ego chooses to present itself outwardly. Take socially, for example, my hairstyle, or, you know, having a beard that has a thing.
You said something really cool earlier. You said the unconscious is conscious. That is something I don't think about often, but it's really cool. So let me expound on that, see how I'm doing. The conscious, the unconscious is conscious.
Echo agrees.
The unconscious is conscious. We don't associate it being conscious because we're not identified with it. We're not aware of it, but it's aware. And the we is just the ego. When I say I'm not aware of the unconscious, I'm talking about ego. But conscious, the quote unquote unconscious, what we mean by unconscious isn't that it's unconscious. It means we are unconscious of it, but it is quite conscious and it's quite us.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that gives it that honors its numinosity. Um, it's like you use the word awareness. Um, and I also like to, like to understand what the word consciousness is or what that's about. That's an experience. I'm just conscious. I know. End of story. Prove it. I can't. I don't have to. It's Gnostic. And by the way, why Gnostic knowledge is so valuable, because it's knowledge based on experience that doesn't require empirical proof. So you're off the hook. Yeah, yeah. And that's a one, it's a wonderful kind of knowledge because you just know. Um, and I'm fond of it. I'm very fond of empirical knowledge too, because we live in the field of life and the practical dynamics, and that's equally important. They work so well together. For example, science and religion. And I use religion in its original term, in terms of spirituality, not as dogma. Because often people think dogma immediately when they think of religion. So, so yes, that. But I also like to I like to circumambulate, like again, coming back to what you brought us to when you were talking about um, going in and having the experience in the felt sense. That's the Gnostic direction right there. Experience, there it is right there. So similarly, and when I was talking about while dealing with unconscious content or the encounter with it, um, using terms instead of defining, which would be hooking that fish and pulling it up into a world where it doesn't. That's not its place. Its place is remains in the unconscious. So instead, using terms like it's like this, consciousness is like being, is like alert, being alert or being awake. And another one I like to add to that is existence. It exists, or even I exist. Uh, the before Abraham was, I am kind of thing, where um, this another phenomenon, which is simply existence, which is really, to me, quite mind blowing. And sometimes it's like, what is this I dare say substance, this phenomenon that 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 is existence. It's like a switch that's turned on, and it's just like everything is just on. Always change, and that's a constant. It's an unchanging constant. So, but I wanted to add existence to it because I guess what I'm saying is, under the right circumstances, you can walk past the same maple tree or whatever every time you go to your car to go to work or whatever, and not like, and one day you just stop and camp out and look at the thing, and you know what I mean. You just get into that zone where it's like, oh my god, this thing is awesome. I didn't, especially in the fall, and if it's a maple tree, and it's like, I didn't really think about it or whatever, and you penetrate into it, so to speak, by well, not pushing it too hard. Phenomenology, letting its suchness speak outward. And that's the same thing with dream work. So those who have done dream work find that, when you engage in active imagination with when you go into the dream world, which is the imagination, the dream images come up in the imagination, the stories unroll. This is all unconscious content, but to meet it, you have to go into its language, which is imaginal. So now you're in that dimension as well. It's good to approach imagination as a dimension, as opposed to a little area in the head or whatever. That way, we're approaching it. We don't hold. It's like with psyche. We don't hold it in our hand and look at it. It holds us in its hand. So we step into the dimension of imagination, and the mystic Sufis have a great word for that. It's called the alam al mithal, the middle world. It's again that liaison, like a psychopomp, metaphorically, that toggles between, that is our guide in and out. So the imagination really is a hermetic place on that level. Being Hermes in the Greek tradition, the psychopomp, literally guide of souls. Because let's remember that the root of the word psyche is soul. That's it. Most people just think psyche means from the neck up, and it doesn't. Psyche means something that we are in, that is that wraps around us, so to speak. So I think that's valuable too, to approach psyche as soul and not as from the neck up, and that we're inside of it as opposed to us being inside of it. So the whole point though was that same thing, just having the experience when you do active imagination, communicating with your unconscious dream figures in the imagination, in its language now. One will find that if you are too pressing, you will push them away. You can't push them away with your projection. So you can't go to a dream figure and say, what do you want? Who are you? Who are you? See, and suddenly it's like you're dealing with a shade, an underworld shade. It's made out of mist. It doesn't really have substance. It's like a reflection in a mirror. You can't just do that. Your breath will blow it apart. It'll just recede. It'll leave. There's a different way to meet it gently, and that again, phenomenology. Something gentler. Hello, I'm here. What can I do for you? Is there anything on your mind, so to speak? That you'd like to share. To be helpful for you. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's right. So that makes lucid dreaming, where you consciously engage with your dreams, it makes it so difficult, right? Because you can be a little too loud with your conscious awareness. So it's that deft touch.
Yeah. Again, the advantages of being a pilot. You just move that. Just move it a little bit this way or that. You know what you're doing to land that plane, to
Right.
feel it in.
Small
Um,
corrections. Yeah.
mhm. And also important on that is going in and not not disturbing the water, which is like a mirror too much with large stones, but you got to go in somehow. So you'll throw in a grain of sand or whatever here or there. And like Galadriel's mirror in the Tolkien fantasy, don't disturb the water, you know, but your eyesight is still touching it.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, many indigenous cultures or whatever, their approach to the senses, to sense perception, a Westerner will think that perception comes into us, and we're like a vessel that receives stimulus. But to them, they reach out with hearing, and they reach out with sight. So they actually get to walk through the phenomenal environment, the trees or desert or whatever, and touch things with it's like the hand of the eye and the hand of the ear, and actually go out and get to make contact with this thing, which now we can tie over to psyche because we're inside of it, and which is soul. So now there's a different kind of relationship there, where we are making contact, but even with something so gentle as looking at is being touched. With this work, once you've planted the seed, it runs on its own. So I don't have to read or write or talk or whatever about this stuff for a month at a time. Yet it's still doing its work in the unconscious. Actually, things are still happening in there because I've already planted the seed. It has a way of building itself and increasing my psychic libido, my vitality. I even think in a way there's a vitality that comes with this work.
Yes.
It's not just clarity of thought or whatever. There's actually well, Freud's using the term libido for it, and not just sexual, but just in terms of energy.
Ah, yeah. So there's a common thread there. So back to this issue of healing, what's healing is becoming more self-aware. And when we become more self-aware, that releases libidinal energy.
That is my experience.
Let's take this one step further. I like libidinal energy, that psychic energy, that creativity, that passion for life. So it has utility. The libidinal energy has utility. Is there another step? Is there even greater context for this healing, self-awareness, and libidinal energy?
To have the attitude of approaching it as a listener as opposed to a speaker.
Yeah.
And because I and to be and now I'm kind of going towards that Western direction of sensory perception as a receiver, because I don't want to disturb the water. Because they'll come to the surface, or from my perspective, come to the surface more if I'm not making a bunch of waves, unless it's a shark. So, but that it's that value of treading in ever increasingly delicate manner into the terrain, um, allows me. It's like an anthropologist. You don't go in there carrying in your iPhone and all this stuff. If you're going to visit um, Aboriginal culture or primitive culture. And I trip on that word a little bit because people have negative connotations with primitive. I don't. Jung didn't. I don't, simply because the root of primitive is prime, and these are folks that are so interesting because here's someone who's actually in really good contact with the psyche. We learn from you, kind of thing. So we're coming to you for answers and help, not to impose our Western stuff. So, but there's this great Haitian proverb, which is, when the anthropologist arrives, the gods depart. And because it's just too Western, it's just too big of a boulder tossed into the water of their environment.
The whole Western approach is a bias, which is self-defeating.
I think it is. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I had a blast. Thank,
Okay. Yeah, me
yeah.
too. That's,
Thank you, brother.
yeah,
We,
it's my pleasure.
yeah, we